This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
Chapter 21, The Gift of a Blade, and our symbol is the rising sun of Cairhien.
Because we're entering Cairhien, and we see Aviendha give Rand a blade. Pretty straightforward.
The camp began to go up quickly, in the mouth of Jengai Pass, if away from Tain, and spreading over the hills around the approaches, among the scattered thorn bushes, and even onto the slopes of mountains. Not that anything was very visible except what was inside the pass. Aiel tents blended into the stony soil so well that you could miss them, even when you knew what you were looking for and where. In the hills, the Aiel camped by clan, but those in the pass itself grouped themselves by society. They were mostly maidens, but the men's societies sent their representatives, too, some 50 each, spreading tents well above the ruins of Tain in slightly separated camps. Everyone understood, or thought they did, about the maidens carrying Rand's honor, but all societies wanted to guard the Karakarn. Moraine, and Lan, of course, went to get Kadir's wagons settled, just below the town. The Aes Sedai fussed over what was in those wagons nearly as much as she did over Rand. The drivers muttered and cursed about the town's smell, and avoided watching the Aiel cut bodies down from the wall. But after their months in the waste, they seemed to like being close even to the wreckage of what they saw as civilization. Gai'Shane were erecting the Wise Ones' tents, those of Amis and Bear and Melaine, below the town, astride the faded track that led up out of the hills. Rand was sure they would say they had chosen the spot to be available to him, as well as to the countless dozens of Wise Ones below, but he thought it no coincidence that anyone coming up from the hills to him would have to go through or around their camp to reach him. He was a little surprised to see Melaine directing the white-robed figures. Only 3 nights before, she had married Bael, and a ceremony that made her his wife and first sister to his other wife, Dorinda. That part had been just as important as the marriage, apparently. Aviendha had been shocked at his surprise, or maybe angry? When Egwene arrived with Aviendha behind her on the grey mare, those full skirts pushed above their knees, they looked like a matched pair despite their different coloring, and Aviendha being tall enough to look over Egwene's shoulder without stretching, each with just one ivory bracelet and one necklace. The work of removing the hanged corpses had barely begun. Most of the ravens lay dead, bundles of black feathers littering the ground, and the rest had flown. But vultures, too gorged to flap aloft, still waddled through the ashes inside the walls. Rand wished there was some way he could keep the 2 women from having to see, but to his surprise, neither went running to empty her stomach. Well, he had not really expected anything of the sort from Aviendha. She had seen death often enough, and dealt it out, too, and her face remained expressionless, but he had not expected the pure pity in Egwene's eyes as she gazed at the bloated dead coming down. She drew Mist over to Jayadeen, and leaned to put a hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry, Rand. There was no way you could have stopped this." "I know," he told her. He had not known there was a town here until Ruark mentioned it casually 5 days ago. His councils with the chiefs had all been on whether they could cover more ground in a day, and what Couladin would do when he cleared the Jangai, and by that time Shaido had finished here and gone. He had done with cursing himself for a fool then. "Well, you just remember it. It was not your fault." She heeled Mist on, and began talking to Aviendha before she was out of earshot. "I'm glad he is taking it so well. He has the habit of feeling guilty over things he cannot control." "Men always believe they are in control of everything around them," Aviendha replied. "When they find out they are not, they think they have failed, instead of learning the simple truth women already know." It's one of my favorite quotes from the whole series.
No, it's a great one. But it's one of the ones that's inherently contradictory. Whenever they start a statement out with, "men do this," it's pretty much, you should say people.
Oh, well, yes. Despite the sexual separation, we see this throughout the series, where, like, men are this or women are that, is always, of course, if you say all blank are blank, you are wrong. Like, there's no way. Right. There's always variable. But I just like the quote, because I think of this, I just think of it a lot. I feel like I've took that lesson to heart.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's very important, and I feel like a kind of understated quality that a lot of people would benefit from if you could you have to be able to know when to tell yourself, like, this thing was out of your control. Like, something may have happened to you, and that was out of your control, and all you can do is figure out what you're going to do about that or in response. Worrying about the future, too, Yet sometimes I have to coach myself a bit. Be like, this is out of your control. Like, if everything goes wrong, everything goes wrong. There's nothing nothing you can do about it now.
No, it's a good lesson to learn. I just think all people, and especially these three, need to learn it.
Oh, of
more
course.
than anyone else.
I mean, everyone, but
right.
I'm constantly working on that.
All right, here's a question: are vultures not eyes for the Dark One? They kill all the ravens and all the crows and all the rats, but they let the vultures, they're carrion eaters as much as anything else. Would they not be great spies for the Dark One?
I noticed that too, and I feel like we see quotes throughout the series where any carrion eater can be used, but it doesn't seem that vultures are ever used in that way. We only ever see rats and ravens.
Once a dove.
Yeah, but that's with the true power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a thought. I just wondered why. They all know that it's carrion eaters. You'd think they'd think that vultures were also evil. I guess they just don't because they're
different somehow.
Different somehow. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And then continuing to working my way backwards, the reason that Avienda is shocked at his surprise is because whenever he acts particularly shocked about a man marrying two women, she gets all offended because that's kind of what she thinks is going to happen. And she's like, well, get used to it, damn it.
And I think, the Emmons Fielders are a bit scandalized by it. They can't believe that such a thing could be allowed.
And and that's like one possible out for her honor because she's like trapped right now between Elaine and loving Rand. And like one possible out would be Elaine is a first sister, and she's like, well, if maybe Rand could have two wives, and he's like, no, you, and she's like, God damn it.
And it would breach protocol for her to discuss that with him.
Right.
So there's that whole thing. Like, if she delivers him to Elaine and then they have a private discussion of Avienda and Elaine away from Rand, then maybe something could be worked out.
But in the meantime, she can't do anything about it.
And it's not for Rand to even know until the decision has been made.
Right. And that's exactly what we see going on here, is this sort of parallel of these three with Avienda, Elaine, and Rand.
Do you think she's thinking that right now?
Absolutely.
Hopefully it goes this way. Yeah.
I think that I think it's in the back of her head, just from some questions she asked. Like when she asks, do you think a Wetlander would ever be okay with two wives? And Egwene's like, not really, no. But I don't really know. Maybe he's changed his mind. I don't know Rand that well.
Oh,
like, she definitely asked that question.
That was just a few chapters ago, I think. Yeah.
And so I think she's definitely thinking about it. And then her reaction here as well makes me think she's definitely thinking about, all right, is there a way for me to resolve my G-toe, the toe that I have towards both Rand and Elaine?
Yeah.
Moraine's fussing over the red Terangrial. Why can I never put that one together? Red door frame Terangrial, because, we know that the Landfair confrontation is coming up, and she has to make sure everything's set up perfectly in order to stop Landfair.
Yeah, so she's checking on that thing daily now.
Oh, absolutely.
Or I think probably the whole time.
That's why she's fussing over it almost as much as Rand, and we know she's not letting Rand relax for half a second. She's like, I have no time left. Let me bug you. Let me tell you about the Kyrian. Let me tell you about the politics. Let me tell you about all the people. You need to be able to do this without me here. And he's like, well, you'll be here for a while. Why do I? No, you must. Please, Rand, listen.
But there's a point where Rand says something like that to Moraine, like, don't worry, like, I'm going to be keeping you, like, you're my advisor now. You're going to be here.
And she's like, we don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I think she just doesn't say anything.
No.
Yeah, I'll be your advisor for a couple more days.
Because now, she knows, like, once they get, she doesn't know exactly where, but isn't it like once they get over the Jengai Pass and they're on, she knows it's like
in Kyrian.
Yeah.
Feel free to correct me on that, people, but I believe the Moraine tackling Landfair moment happens after the battle.
Yes.
We'll be there soon enough in any case.
And that really is, she knows, I think, if the Aiel pass through the Jengai Pass, that's a bit repetitive, that her fate is kind of inevitable. I don't know why I get that idea, but because that's when she was arguing, like, do you have to take the Aiel across the spine of the world? And she's like sort of making that argument, and we said that was like really she was kind of trying to save her own life because she knew that she would be stuck in this situation if he crossed the spine of the world.
Looking for a way out. I assume that, and although we never really find out a lot of the details, I assume that what Moraine knows is actually something more like, if this, then that, and if that, then you die. Or, so she's seen all these different ways things can go, and she's thinking the only way to get Lanfear out of the picture and save Rand from her is to sacrifice herself, to take them both out. And quick follow-up, Painted Dead said the Moraine-Lanfear confrontation happens, I believe, after the Battle of Cairhien when they're on their way toward Caemlyn. Sounds right.
They're on the docks of Caemlyn. So I think they're on the river Arenell. At
the docks of Cairhien?
Yeah. He's about to go after Ravine, and Moraine's like, wait, before you go, I need to show you something down at the docks. So, like, he's not even going to the docks. Moraine takes him down there to set the whole thing up. Like, it's incredible. Like, when you really look at it, you're like, holy shit, Moraine orchestrated the entire event from the start just to take out Lanfear. So good. Fucking Moraine. She's taking out Bilal. Now she's going after Lanfear.
Yeah. Keith is telling us that they skimmed to Caemlyn. I didn't remember that either, but I believe that's when a single maiden is lost. Is that right? Falls off the side. That's another scene that I think about a lot. Just falling until you die of dehydration, I assume. Because there's no floor.
Right.
How horrifying.
And there doesn't be, like, air doesn't appear to be an issue. I have to wonder if the air pressure would crush you first. That if eventually just the weight of falling, you'd go deeper and deeper and deeper. And all, like, if there's atmosphere, the atmosphere has weight. Eventually the atmospheric pressure would crush you. Or if it's just like the magic of the place keeps the same atmosphere everywhere, which is probably more likely.
I would think so, because we're actually talking about the space between worlds, right? So it's not even really, it's kind of a non-place.
Right. There's not even really air there. It's kind of like being in the world of dreams in the flesh, where it's like, obviously, like, you need to eat eventually, but somehow you're breathing, because you believe you're breathing. It's one of those things.
Yes, I would say so.
And so I imagine something similar applies, that, like, as long as you believe you're breathing, as long as you believe there's air, you make air. Because you're kind of not in reality anymore. I kind of think of it like parallel worlds. Like, if Rand says if you open a gate in a slightly different place, you'd never find them. You have to open a gate in the exact same place to enter the same space.
You'd never find them?
So I think when he's traveling, when he's chasing Asmodean, doesn't he say, like, he can't let the gateway close, because if he opened another gate just in a slightly different place, he wouldn't be in the same place as Asmodean. He wouldn't be in the same in-between world space. Maybe I'm making that up.
I don't remember that. He's chasing Asmodean?
Yeah, back when... remember Asmodean skims to Ruidian to get away from Rand?
Oh, yeah.
And he makes a gateway, and Rand, like, holds it open and jumps after him, and his boot gets, like, cut off.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
So that's when he's talking about, like, oh, if I can't let the gateway close, because if I do, even if I open a gateway in the exact same place, I'll never be able to find him.
Right. He has to use Asmodean's gateway. I assume he does not have the weave reading talent.
Oh, yeah.
The residues thing?
The residues, yeah. That's one of those things where, I don't know how easy it is to follow somebody.
It seems like it's a pretty rare ability.
Yeah. And like, that's the difference between also skimming and traveling. I bet with traveling, you could see where the destination is. But with skimming, you'd have no idea. Because all you're doing is opening a gateway to
nothing. And then from nothing, you go somewhere else and out the other side of nothing.
So you'd have to, like, get into the same nothing they're in and see the weave that they wove to get out of the nothing, and then you'd be able to arrive in the same place. But that's... Ugh.
Nin's asking a good question. Why choose skimming over traveling? I think there's a couple of situations where skimming is better.
If you don't know your current location, you can skim just to get out of there. So that's super helpful. So, like, you can just be like, oh, I don't know where the fuck I am. Skimming the fuck out of here.
And then there's this situation that you brought up with Asmodean where he may have skimmed to conceal his ultimate destination.
Right.
But Rand stays hot enough on his tails that he can actually see him. So I think there's a couple of situations. And at this point, Rand only knows he doesn't know how to travel yet.
Right. And that's why we see him pile all the maidens onto a big disc. And when they attack Ravine, and he loses one because he only knows how to skim. And so he uses that as a traveling technique, but it has its limits before he can use traveling at will.
Painted Dead says because skimming is more dramatic. I kind of like that. It is pretty cool, actually, to be surfing on a platform through nothing.
Totally. And to have no reference except the person you're chasing. It's like the most exciting, boring chase ever.
Speeding by blackness. I assume the only way you would know you were moving is if there was someone else there.
Right. And yeah, that like slight distance change.
There's nothing to look at.
It kind of, what's the scene in Austin Powers where the steamroller's going and he's like, get out of the way, and there's like this huge distance between them and it's just like slowly closing.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it reminds me, is like they're traveling super fast, but the distance is just closing ever so slowly.
No scale.
And so you have this dramatic music in the background where like they're both barely moving. Of course, there are the giant walls of fire that once Asmodean sees Rand's following him, he starts tossing walls of fire at Rand and like throwing other things at him behind the walls of fire. It's a pretty exciting scene, actually, now that I think about it. That was a fun one. Yeah.
Rand asks Asmodean about the platform up in the mountains that looks like it was once a harbor. And Asmodean says basically, the world is completely different now. I wouldn't be able to tell you, but he said this could easily be the place where I was born, which was a port city, but, you know, obviously not the only one. He doesn't go that far, but I think that's the implication. Like, I don't know, man. It's a port. It's everything's blown up. Like, these mountains weren't here before. Nothing was shaped like this. He's like, I don't know where we are.
I have no reference points.
Yeah.
And one of the things I actually was reading recently from Q&A session with Jordan is he said that the place where Dragonmount was formed, you know, that happened right at the beginning of the breaking. Apparently, it was moved at some point during the breaking. Like, it was the mountain, the river, and the island stayed intact and were moved from, like, one part of the continent to another. So the place where they currently are now isn't necessarily the place where it was formed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. This is because there are all the balefire problems as well, which I imagine would have been happening during the breaking, too. If you have just a bunch of mad, powerful channelers running around...
Balefiring cities.
Who knows what they did, yeah. Or just random things, which would cause everything to shift around and the fabric of reality to pull apart and come back together.
So the next thing I have is them coming upon Asmodean, playing his music. Quick dark friend alert with Melindra hanging out with Matt. You're dating a dark... what's the... I married an axe murderer. I married a dark friend. You're dating a dark friend? Oh my god.
I was just talking about the conversation they were having. He asks Asmodean about the port. Asmodean doesn't know.
I really like the line when he's complaining about carrying the banner, and he says, "You carry it because you were chosen, Jason Tail."
Hey.
And he's like,
I see what you did there, Rand.
Asmodean is not excited about that.
I wanted to ask, and this is like kind of after the conversation with Asmodean, Rand is setting wards around the camp as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And he notes he reached through the Angreal in his coat pocket to see Sidene. There is no need to actually touch the carving of the fat little man with a sword, of course.
I thought that was an important line as well.
And is this just telling us that if a channeler is in the vicinity of an Angreal, you can use it? You don't have to touch it. It just has to be near you.
No, you can reach through it as long as you can, you're aware of where it is. I think touching it helps, sort of just like with delving. Touching helps make the connection.
Yeah.
But you can make the connection without touching.
And I guess he ran channels and makes this ward around the camp that essentially all it does is warn him if shadow spawn pass a certain line.
I think it warns everybody. It has an alarm go off. Sort of the way I think Moraine set one of those up when they were in the mountains and after the Great Hunt. when they're sort of just up in the mountains of mist hanging out, she sets up a ward that I think will warn everybody if dark friends enter.
Doesn't, like, bells ring or something? Mm-hmm. Is that right? Yeah.
I think that's right.
Not actual bells, but yes.
But the sound of bells is created by the one power.
Right. And I thought it was also maybe at least a little important that Rand kind of notes that this is one kind of ward that will just warn everyone. And he was like, there are other more powerful ones where, like, he could set a ward that would, any shadow spawn that passed through it would explode, or, like, he could do those things. But those take so much more effort and power that he seems to think if he does that, he'll be broadcasting his position.
That's a lot of power. I wonder if, I guess inverting it doesn't help if you're pulling in that much power. And what we're seeing here is also, like, RJ say, like, Rand is leveled up again, guys. Like, he's gotten teaching. You know, he says Asmodean's teachings were making him stronger. We see him do these big weaves. He's gotten Angreal. Like, he matched Asmodean punch for punch.
Mm-hmm.
He was exactly matched, and now he's much more powerful than Asmodean. So what we're seeing is, like, okay, Rand is than Asmodean used to be before the ward. And so Rand is really jumping up the levels of power. Before, he was always like, Bilal was certainly more powerful than he was, right? He just got the sword.
Right, Rand could barely channel at that point.
And so what we're seeing now is Rand is actually Forsaken level power. Even if it's just sort of the bottom rung of Forsaken level power, he's still got a little ways to go before he's like the most powerful channeler as he expands out his power a bit.
Oh, right. I wanted to add earlier, only the Chosen know how to invert weaves as of right now.
He did say that he went back and reset the weaves on Kalendor because Asmodean taught him how to invert his weaves. So he does know how to do it as of now.
Oh, Rand is the first one. I thought of that as a Magi thing.
So right now, Rand is the only one.
That's how the girls learn.
She teaches them here shortly, but yeah. She has not quite been captured. That happens in this book, and the next book is when they level up. So they get to sort of trail behind Rand a little bit in their Forsaken teaching.
Yeah, and I very much believe that, well, I don't know about Rand, but all the other young channelers that we see, at the very least, are still stretching, for lack of a better term. They're still coming into their power. Rand may be close.
He's getting there, but like I said, he just said, this teaching has made me stronger.
Yeah, and I think that's RJ kind of signaling to us that using the power makes you, is what gets you to your potential.
And training.
Yeah.
I feel like it's using it the right way also makes you more powerful. If that makes sense?
Yeah, I just think of it kind of like muscles. Like, the only way you're going to reach your full potential is by beating yourself up over and over, basically, You have to stretch and strain and go through some pain, and you'll reach the potential of your muscles.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. He notes at least he has the Aiel to watch out for human enemies because he can't set both wards. Or he's afraid that if he sets many, then none of them will work.
Totally. Oh, I notice here Avienda also talks about the fact that she is not nearly as powerful as she's going to become. They say it is possible to draw too much and harm yourself. Frowning slightly, she added more to herself, though I have not come near what I can hold yet. I am sure of it.
Yeah.
So she hasn't even tested her top power, and she's just getting more and more powerful as well. She's not top tier Aes Sedai, but she is definitely, no slouch when it comes to channeling.
I marked a good bit of the read when Avienda gives Rand the sword, but I feel like to walk up to that, I should just note that Avienda kind of comes out of nowhere and she's waving around what's called, I think, a blood snake, which is dead. She killed it with her belt knife, I assume by throwing, but Rand freaks out and he's angry with her for a second for getting near it even, and that is because he cares. Which is gosh, I mean, I think we all do this, where someone you really care about puts themselves at serious risk. I don't get angry about much, but I've definitely gotten angry a couple of times. We're what were you thinking? If you get messed up, that messes up my day. You know what I mean?
My mother spanked me once, and only once, and that's when I ran across the street as a little kid and nearly got hit by a truck.
Yeah.
And I scared, and that's exactly I scared her, and she got angry at me.
Yeah. I totally get it. Where you're almost like, you care about someone enough that you're almost like defending yourself. Like it feels the same way emotionally, maybe I should say.
No, that makes sense. It's like you have a part of my heart. You cannot break it.
Yeah.
And I will hurt you if you break my heart. Well, I think the blood snake is a cobra, or like a copper, some sort of. It doesn't rattle, so it's not a rattlesnake.
There are real life snakes that Rand describes it as if it bites you, its venom causes your blood to clot very rapidly. You die in minutes. Bladen says sand viper. I don't know enough about snakes.
I don't either.
I'm from New Jersey, guys.
Avoid the copperheads. That's all I know.
I think that may be a pretty common attribute in snake venom. You were worried for me, she said in a flat voice. There was no expression at all on her face. Of course not, he lied. Fool woman. She'll get herself killed yet because she doesn't have the sense to be careful when it's needed, he thinks. I'd have been as worried for anyone. I would not want anyone to be bitten by a blood snake. For a moment, she eyed him doubtfully, then gave a quick nod. Good. So long as you don't presume toward me. Tossing the bundled blanket at his feet, she sat on her heels across from the fire pit from him. You would not accept the buckle as canceling the debt between us. Avienda, there is no debt. He thought that she had forgotten about that. She went on as if he had not spoken, but perhaps that will cancel it. Sighing, he unwrapped the striped blanket, warily. Since she had held it far more uneasily than she had the snake, she had held the bloody snake as if it were a piece of cloth, unwrapped it, and gasped. What lay inside was a sword, the scabbard so encrusted with rubies and moonstones that it was hard to see the gold except where a rising sun of many rays had been inset. The ivory hilt, long enough for 2 hands, had another inlaid rising sun in gold. The pommel was thick with rubies and moonstones, and, still more, made a solid mass along the quillions. This had never been made to use, only to be seen, to be stared at. This must have cost... Avienda, how could you pay for it? It cost little, she said, so defensively that she might as well have added that she lied. A sword. How did you ever come by a sword? How did any Aiel come by a sword? Don't tell me Kadir had this hidden in his wagons. I carried in a blanket. She sounded even more touchy now than she had about the price. Even Bear said that would make it all right, so long as I did not actually touch it. She shrugged uncomfortably, shifting and reshifting her shawl. It was the tree killer's sword, Laman's. It was taken from his body as proof that he was dead, because his head could not be brought back so far. Since then, it has passed from hand to hand, young men or fool maidens who wanted to own proof of his death, only each began to think of what it was, and soon sold it to another fool. The price has come down very far since it was first sold. No Aiel would lay hand to it even to remove the stones. Well, it is very beautiful, he said, as tactfully as he could manage. Only a buffoon would carry something this gaudy, and that ivory hilt would twist in a hand slippery with sweat or blood. But I cannot let you... He trailed off as he bared a few inches of the blade. Out of habit, to examine the edge. Etched into the shining steel stood a heron, symbol of a blade master. He had carried a sword marked like that once. Suddenly, he was ready to bet that this blade was like it. Like the raven-marked blade on Matt's spear. Metal made with a power that would never break, and never need sharpening. Most blade master's swords were only copies of those. Lan could tell him for certain, but he was sure already in his own mind. Pulling the scabbard off, he leaned across the fire pit to place it in front of her. I will take the blade to cancel the debt, Avienda. It was long and slightly curved, with a single edge. Just the blade. You can have the hilt back, too. He could have a new hilt and scabbard made in Cairien. Maybe one of Tane's survivors was a decent bladesmith. She stared wide-eyed from the scabbard to him and back, mouth open, stunned for the first time that he had ever seen. But those gems are worth much, much more than I... You are trying to put me in your debt again, Rand al'Thor. Not so. If this blade had lain untouched and untarnished in its scabbard for over 20 years, it had to be what he thought. I did not accept the scabbard, so it has been yours all along. Tossing one of the silk cushions into the air, he executed the seated version of a form called Low Wind Rising. Feathers rained down as the blade sliced neatly through. And I don't accept the hilt either, so that's yours too. If you have made a profit, it's your own doing.
Laman, you vain bitch. Seriously, like, look at that fucking hilt. Really? Did you
It's
need all
ridiculous.
that? Did you need the throne? You're a ridiculous man, and you deserve to get your head cut off.
I want to point out to you that Avienda doesn't understand what just the blade is worth.
The gems are worthless compared to it.
Right. The gems are replaceable, and they are worth a fortune, but
Yeah, they're gaudy.
fortunes can't buy a Heron Mark blade.
Not one that's power forged.
There just aren't enough to sell.
Yeah. Basically, and then he gives her all the gems on it, and she's like, that's more than I spent on it. And she probably spent her entire life savings, which means he probably just made her one of the richest Aiel around.
Or,
Because essentially
at least very
Laman put
wealthy.
like a king's fortune on his blade, and he just gave that to Avienda.
Yeah.
She just has so much wealth now from now on. And I think that we see that later when like she's hanging out with the girls and they're like, does anyone have any money? And she's like, well, is this? And she pulls out like something worth like way more than all the rest
Fistful
of
of
them have.
diamonds or something.
Yeah, something like that. And it's just like, where did those come from? Probably Laman's sword, honestly.
Yeah. And I wanted to also I also wanted to speculate about Rand picks up the blade, looks at it, and he's like almost certain just by its looks that it's a power rot blade. But there's this line, but he was sure already in his own mind. I guess that doesn't give us very much, but the first thing that sprung into my head was I wonder if Rand can tell as a channeler in the way we see... Oh gosh, I forgot the name of the Ashaman that works with Perrin to make...
I think the fact that it's just not tarnished. He pulls out the blade and sees it, and like any normal blade that had been in a scabbard for 20 years would be just covered in rust. And so the fact that it's untarnished means like, of course, he has to test it, but of course he thinks it's like obvious. That's enough evidence right there that it's power rot. I don't think he's sensing it.
No Aiel would have even taken it out of the scabbard, so he knows it's just been sitting there like that.
Mm-hmm.
No one would have touched the metal, so it couldn't have been polished.
And it's like passed from Aiel to Aiel, each one being like, I can sell this for a little. I really don't. They like think it's cool, and then it's like this fucking sword. Like, it's disgusting. And they end up giving it up for cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah, I have nothing to back this up, but Rand with his fire affinity, I really want to believe that he picks it up and he can just feel that it's power rot.
Maybe he has a similar affinity to it that he did with.
So I'm going to believe that based on nothing.
Okay. You could headcanon that. I will disagree with you. Yeah, that's fine. But, and he knows it's a king's sword, so obviously the king is probably going to have, like, the Heron Mark blade. Like, logically, if any blade's going to be Heron Marked and power rot.
Especially the fact that it isn't tarnished.
Right. Yeah. And then the fact that it's, like, the best, supposedly the best of the best, right? It's like someone who just wants a sword for display. What are they going to do? They're going to get a Heron Mark blade and then put all this gem-encrusted crap on it. And so I keep seeing Heron Mark power forged blade, and put all this junk on it because they want to display the fact that they have the best. Because Laman is a vain bitch.
Mm-hmm.
I seriously doubt Laman was ever a actual blade master.
I doubt it as well. I think he was a bit of a fop, which is why he wanted these showy things, a throne carved from the Tree of Life, and not just a Heron Mark blade, but a Heron Mark blade covered in rubies. A blade in both. So I think Seth corrected himself before, because we do know that there are very finely crafted swords that people mark with a heron in this age, but they're not actually power rot. And there are some power rot blades that are not heron marked, like Landsword.
But his father's blade was both Heron Mark and power rot, and so is this one.
Right.
I don't think we ever see... I think, like, isn't, like, Valda's sword Heron Marked, but not power rot?
We see it a few times through the series, and I think Lan gives us a knowledge drop pretty early on.
Right.
When he's talking about Rand's father's sword.
How, like, the Heron was a mark of excellence, and they got the best blades, but then, obviously, like, you can still be good enough to get a Heron Mark blade, and there just aren't enough power rot blades to go around.
So they're made for those people.
But I think of it sort of, I'm guessing it was like a brand in the Age of Legends. And like, it was one of those things where like the brand became synonymous with being a really good, like the best swordsman got the best swords. So they got the swords with the Heron Mark. So it just sort of became this idea that like...
I would like to think of it that way. But it's like It's the champagne of sparkling wine. Like, all champagne is sparkling wine, but champagne is from champagne. And people will pay more because...
I was going to go with the Kleenex of tissue paper.
I mean, yeah, same thing. But, yeah. Cava is really just as good as champagne. They just can't call it champagne because there's rules. It's a bit like a brand, but it's a region.
And the French government bought into that and passed a bunch of laws.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fine idea. They get to charge a little more for the kind of status symbol of buying real French champagne from Champagne.
So, quick question. What does the seeded version of the form called low wind rising look like?
I imagine it's almost horizontal, but rises slightly. So it's not quite horizontal. You know what I mean? Low wind rising. That's just the way I visualized it. I don't really have a way to...
I kind of thought of it like past the path of a plane taking off.
I like that.
Sort of low along the ground, and then it sort of hits that curve and goes upwards towards the end as you flick it up. And just cuts right through the pillow. And you kind of want it out in front of you and up and to the side because he's sitting. So you don't want to cut your toes off.
For the rest, before I make it to the readout, there's kind of an awkward scene where Rand and Avienda are getting ready for bed in the same tent, and Rand is like silently freaking out because Avienda's getting undressed underneath her blankets.
Yeah, at some point we see her stop getting under her blankets to get undressed and just start undressing whenever he has his back turned.
Yeah. They are having a conversation. Rand is asking about Aiel marriage customs because he just witnessed Melane's wedding to Bael.
And this is where I think we get the knowledge drop about he gave her that bracelet that has a bunch of blossoms, sagode blossoms in it, right?
I think he gave her the carved roses bracelet with thorns, but he also gave her a gift of sagade blossoms.
Oh, that's right. He gave her the actual blossoms.
We could see how, to her, this would have seemed intentional. Like, it's almost like he matched them. Because we see her explain here... Melaine nearly drove herself and Dorinda to distraction, finding sagade blossoms for the wreath. Few grow so close to the dragon wall. And Rand asks, does that mean something special? And this is, I think, our only tidbit where Avienda lists a few blossoms and what they mean, and how, essentially, she says, giving him the sagade blossoms would indicate that she believes she has a prickly nature and means to keep it.
Which is where we find out that, when he gave her the skate blossoms, he was basically saying, Avienda, you have a prickly nature, but I expect you to keep it.
And I'm okay with that, yeah.
And I'm okay with that. And she's like, well, fine, damn it.
And she said if they had been sweet root flowers, it would have meant she had a sweet nature. If they were morning drops, it would mean that she's a submissive person. And there are too many to list, she says, basically. And there are...
Notice she doesn't list flowers or roses.
Like infinite combinations of them that all mean different things. There had been more of a muffled sound to her voice at the end. Pulling her blouse over her head, he realized. He wished the lamps were out. No, that would have made it worse. But then, he had been through this every single night since Ruidian, and every single night it was worse. He had to put an end to it. The Wimo's going to sleep with the wise ones, where she belonged, from now on. He would learn what he could from her, as he could. He had thought exactly the same thing for 15 nights now. Trying to chase the pictures out of his head, he said, that bit at the end, after the vows were said. No sooner had half a dozen wise ones pronounced their blessings than 100 of Melane's bloodkin had rushed in to surround her, all carrying their spears. 100 of Bael's kin had rallied to him, and he had fought his way to her. No one had been veiled, of course. It was all part of a custom, but blood had still been shed on both sides. A few minutes before, Melaine was vowing that she loved him, but when he reached her, she fought like a quartered ridge cat. If Dorinda had not punched her in the short ribs, he did not think Bael would have ever gotten her over his shoulder to carry her off. He still has the limp and the black eye she gave him, Rand says. Should she have been a weakling? Avienda said sleepily. He had to know the worth of her. She was not a trinket for him to put in his pouch. She yawned, and he heard her nestling deeper into her blankets. What does teaching a man to sing mean? Aiel men did not sing. Not once they were old enough to take up a spear, except for battle chants and laments for the dead. You are thinking of Matt Cawthon? She actually giggled. Sometimes a man gives up the spear for a maiden. "You're making that up. I never heard of anything like that." "Well, it is not really giving up the spear." Her voice held a thick muzziness. "Sometimes a man desires a maiden who will not give up the spear for him, and he arranges to be taken gai'shain by her. He is a fool, of course. No maiden would look at a gai'shain as he hopes. He has worked hard and kept strictly to his place, and the first thing that is done to make him learn to sing, to entertain the spear sisters while they eat. She is going to teach him to sing. That is what maidens say when a man makes a fool of himself over one of the spear sisters. A very peculiar people." "Avienda?" He had said he was not going to ask her this again. Lan said it was Kandori work, a pattern called snowflakes, probably loot from some raid up north. "Who gave you that necklace?" "A friend, Randall Thor. We came far today, and you will start us early tomorrow. Sleep well and wake, Randall Thor. Only an Aiel would wish you good night by hoping you did not die in your sleep." Sitting the much smaller, if much more intricate ward on his dreams, he channeled the lamps out and tried to sleep. A friend. The rain had come from the north, but she had had the necklace before in Ruidian. Why did he care? Avienda's slow breathing seemed loud in his ears until he fell asleep, and then he dreamed a confused dream of Min and Elaine helping him throw Avienda, wearing nothing but that necklace, over his shoulder, while she beat him over the head with a wreath of sagade blossoms. That's not confused, man. Nothing confused about that.
I mean, I'm sure his feelings are quite confusing, but
he just doesn't know what to do with them.
Yeah. I think it's pretty straightforward.
The only thing I wanted to point out here was, and I just thought it was cute, at the very beginning of that read, Rand says, but then he had been through this every single night since Ruidian, and every single night it was worse. And
right?
That is, of course, because, yeah, he can't stop thinking.
Getting more and more
He wants to
attracted
be
to
under
her.
those blankets, too. And he has to sleep next to this girl and not.
He's fallen in love. I also like the explanation of teaching a man to sing. I know we've implied other things about teaching a man to sing, but we actually see that, like, male Aes Sedai don't sing unless they're gai'shain. And then the maidens, like, force them to, like, sing badly as entertainment while they eat.
Male Aiel.
Yes. Sorry, I said Aes Sedai, didn't I?
That's all right. Yeah, I really wanted that to mean something dirtier, but I guess not. I agree with you, Obscure. Pretty much anything that's like an apocalyptic type story I always love. I'm not sure what I love so much about that.
I think it's seeing people in situations that you can, like, what if I was in this world? What, you know, there's always that what if, right? What if the world did this and you survived?
It's a challenging, interesting problem that you can play with endlessly.
And I love doing the thing like, oh, don't go into the building, you know, that sort of thing. Like, I wouldn't go into the building if I was that person. Oh, would I get that tool? No, I would totally grab this tool. You know, the sort of, like, judging everybody in the post-apocalyptic world to be like...
They, like, pick up a brick and kill one zombie and then drop it and run away. Like, no, keep the brick.
Right.
There's more.
It's a useful brick. Name it Bob. Keep it with you. But then it like makes you feel clever. Like, well, I wouldn't have died. And you're like, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I always figured in those first couple of months, it's just random chance. Like, it almost doesn't matter how well prepared you are. And if you're really well prepared, that might even be worse for you.
Right. Because people are going to, like, seek help.
Someone need a hidey hole somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the best idea is, like, someone just comes out and is like, where everybody been? Oh, corpses. Which is actually kind of what I like about, again, going back to Earth Abides, he's just up in the mountains camping. And, like, he sees one car go by, and then a couple of weeks go by, and he's like, you know, I haven't seen any cars for a while.
Ooh, and he comes down out of the mountains, and he's like, what happened?
And it's in the first couple of pages, but he gets bit by a rattlesnake, and the snake venom actually protects him from the plague that's killing everybody, and that's why he survives. So he actually goes down into town after he gets bit by the snake, and like he basically walks into what essentially is an empty world. And in the book, it does sort of say like most of the bodies like were buried. It like happened slowly enough and well enough that there's not like there's some mass graves, but for the most part the city's empty and there aren't a bunch of bodies lying around. So it really is just like what happens if people just disappeared.
Yeah.
And like the first 3 pages is the end of the world, and then
something compelling about apocalyptic stories like that. What would I do? That's what makes it so fun.
But I can't recommend Earth Abides by George R. Stewart highly enough. I mean, it's a 1949 post-apocalyptic world that I feel like sets the standard for what every other post-apocalyptic world story should be. Like, there's a lot of these little things about like animals coming back, and like, there's all these little things that like are really interesting from a natural point of view.
Oh yeah. I love that about the Emberverse series, where like there's lions roaming the Great Plains of the United States because there's lions, in zoos and stuff. If someone left those doors open, give it 100 years, who knows?
And there used to be lions roaming the plains of the U.S.
All kinds of things.
I believe that's the case. Tigers. Was it tigers in the U.S.? Or just bears? And lions and tigers.
I think
bears.
It depends on how far back you go.
Oh my.
Giant sloths at one point.
Oh god, that's right.
If you go back far enough, yeah.
Yeah, then we're going back to like Ice Age level stuff, yeah.
A type of lion, Panthera atrox, is an extinct pantherine cat that lived in North America during the Pleistocene epoch, about 340,000 to 11,000 years ago. It's huge.
Is that the like saber-toothed tiger, basically?
Oh, wow. Yeah, but this thing spanned from Africa all the way across Eurasia to the United States, or what's now the United States.
There used to be a lot more big animals, yeah. It's crazy. I mean, like, I really do think that the changing atmosphere affects animal size, and
oh, of course,
echoes all the way up the food chain.
Those things went out at, I think, what was the end of one of the last ice ages? 11,000 years ago? After Pleistocene, do we get to Anthropocene?
We've had a pretty long run of stable weather without an ice age. It's been surprisingly long. That's why in the 70s and early 80s, everyone was like, we're going into an ice age, because it was like, frankly, it's been a longer than the usual cycle that takes us into an ice age. But that's something that takes place over, 100,000 years, 10,000 years. We're changing the atmosphere over decades. It's one of those things where the short-term effect of what we're doing is basically just totally decimating the long-term effect of what seems to be an ice age that is tied to the cycles of the sun. That if you analyze the cycles, you can sort of see there's like cycles within cycles within cycles, and like it does seem like you can coordinate those with the ice age, the colder periods of when the Earth gets slightly less exposure. But that takes place over such a long time period, the animals evolved to adjust.
We had a good thing, humans.
Yeah.
Done messed it up. Anyway, I'm going to open this book and try to recenter myself. Moving away from the Pleistocene. I don't remember.
The age before the Age of Legends. Or the age after, perhaps.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?